Welcome to the Captain's Corner, your place to get informed about first steps to recovery and how we at Safe Harbour help to create healthy and safe communities. Okay, here is a statement. Everything we know about addiction is wrong, says Johann Hari. And we are actually watching a TED Talk today, right, Kath?
Yes.
Yes. So welcome, Kath Hoffman, to the Captain's Corner. Welcome everyone else to today's show. We are excited about this topic today because we wanted to do it for a couple of weeks already, but today is the right day.
Yes.
So,
and
Kath,
I'm excited to show this to people. Johann Hari and his book, Chasing the Scream, is someone I refer lots of people to who are asking me questions about addiction, or maybe have a loved one who's addicted. And I've been a fan of certainly of his book for a long time. He writes in a way that everybody can relate to. His purpose, he had a brother who had an addiction. And it occurred to him when he was trying to figure out how to support his brother that he didn't really know a lot about addiction and that he had a lot of questions all of a sudden. And so he tried to find some books that could help inform him, but he couldn't really find anything that really spoke to him. So he's like a researcher guy. So he went around the world and talked to a whole gamut of people, and not just professional people, but people who have lived experience with addiction, who are trying new ways to help people with addiction. And he just put this all together in this wonderful book. And again, the book's called Chasing the Scream, and it's a great read. And then I was really glad that he did this TED Talk, because lots of people don't like to read books, or they won't read the whole book or whatever. And he condenses this wonderful book in this short TED Talk. So that's also a great resource for me to refer people to, right? And because last week was National Addictions Awareness Week, I thought this was a really good way to bring this forward, these ideas forward. So this is what he says he found. He found, after he did all this research, everything he was led to believe about addiction was proved wrong. And he tells us this with some great stories that I use lots of times. He talks about another guy who's a mentor of mine, Bruce Alexander, at Simon Fraser University. And he wrote a wonderful paper on not just the addict, the person who is addicted, but society and how we are contributing to that, right? And I'm a Bruce Alexander groupie, like totally. And so Johann Hari tells the great story of Bruce Alexander and what he found out about addiction when he did some experiments. So we're going to listen to this, and I think everybody's going to really like it. I hope so. Yeah. So let's get started.
Let's get started. Okay. So for everyone else, we are not watching the whole thing, and you just we are like breaking it up in little pieces so that we all can follow, and you guys can also like hear our thoughts about this. Okay. So I'm sharing my screen, and okay, let's get going.
Yeah, this is, hey, look, he's got stars too.
Oh my God, he's Harvard.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's TED Talks that have stars.
One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to. And I was just a little kid, so I didn't really understand why. But as I got older, I realized we had drug addiction in my family, including later cocaine addiction. I've been thinking about it a lot lately, partly because it's now exactly 100 years since drugs were first banned in the United States and Britain, and we then imposed that on the rest of the world. It's a century since we made this really fateful decision to take addicts and punish them and make them suffer, because we believed that would deter them, it would give them an incentive to stop. And a few years ago, I was looking at some of the addicts in my life who I love and trying to figure out if there was some way to help them. And I realized there were loads of incredibly basic questions I just didn't know the answer to. Like, what really causes addiction? Why do we carry on with this approach that doesn't seem to be working? And is there a better way out there that we could try instead? So I read loads of stuff about it and I couldn't really find the answers I was looking for. So I thought, okay, I'll go and sit with different people around the world who've lived this and studied this and talk to them and see if I can learn from them. And I didn't realize I would end up going over 30,000 miles at the start, but I ended up going and meeting loads of different people, from a transgender crack dealer in Brownsville, Brooklyn, to a scientist who spends a lot of time feeding hallucinogens to mongooses to see if they like them. It turns out they do, but only in very specific circumstances. To the only country that's ever decriminalized all drugs, from cannabis to crack, Portugal. And the thing I realized that really blew my mind is almost everything we think we know about addiction is wrong. And if we start to absorb the new evidence about addiction, I think we're going to have to change a lot more than our drug policies. But let's start with what we think we know, what I thought I know, right? Let's think about this middle row here, right? Imagine all of you for 20 days now went off and used heroin 3 times a day. Some of you look a little bit more enthusiastic than others at this prospect. Don't worry, it's just a thought experiment. Imagine you did that, right? What would happen? Now, we have a story about what would happen that we've been told for a century. We think because there are chemical hooks in heroin, as you took it for a while, your body would become dependent on those hooks. You'd start to physically need them. And at the end of those 20 days, you'd all be heroin addicts, right? That's what I thought. First thing that alerted me to the fact something not right with this story, when it was explained to me, if I step out of this TED Talk today and I get hit by a car and I break my hip, I'll be taken to hospital and I'll be given loads of diamorphine. Diamorphine is heroin. It's actually much better heroin than you're ever going to buy on the streets, because the stuff you buy from a drug dealer is contaminated. Actually, very little of it is heroin, whereas the stuff you get from the doctor is medically pure. And you'll be given it for quite a long period of time. There are loads of people in this room may not realize that you've taken quite a lot of heroin, right? And anyone watching this anywhere in the world, this is happening. And if what we believe about addiction is right, those people are exposed to all those chemical hooks. What should happen? They should become addicts. This has been studied really carefully. It doesn't happen. You will have noticed if your grandmother had a hip replacement, she didn't come out as a junkie. And when I learned this, it just seemed so weird to me. So contrary to everything I've been told, everything I thought I knew, I just thought it couldn't be right. Until I went and met a man called Bruce Alexander, who's a professor of psychology in Vancouver, who carried out an incredible experiment that I think really helps us to understand this issue. Professor Alexander explained to me, the idea of addiction we've all got in our heads, that story, comes partly from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. You can do them tonight when you go home if you feel a little bit sadistic. You get a rat and you put it in a cage and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drug water and almost always kill itself quite quickly. So there you go, right? That's how we think it works. In the 70s, Professor Alexander comes along and he looks at this experiment and he noticed something. He said, we're putting the rat in an empty cage. It's got nothing to do except use these drugs. Let's try something a bit different. So Professor Alexander built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically heaven for rats, right? They've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of colored balls, they've got loads of tunnels. Crucially, they've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, and they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water. But here's the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, they don't like the drugged water. They almost never use it. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. You go from almost 100% overdose when they're isolated to 0% overdose when they have happy and connected lives. Now, when he first saw this, Professor Alexander thought, maybe this is just a thing about rats. They're quite different to us, maybe not as different as we'd like, but, but fortunately, there was a human experiment into the exact same principle happening at the exact same time. It was called the Vietnam War. In Vietnam, 20% of all American troops were using loads of heroin. And if you look at the news reports from the time, they were really worried because they thought, my God, we're going to have hundreds of thousands of junkies on the streets of the United States when the war ends. It made total sense. Now, those soldiers who were using loads of heroin were followed home. The Archives of General Psychiatry did a really detailed study. And what happened to them? It turns out they didn't go to rehab. They didn't go into withdrawal. 95% of them just stopped. Now, if you believe the story about chemical hooks, that makes absolutely no sense. But Professor Alexander began to think there might be a different story about addiction. He said, what if addiction isn't about your chemical hooks? What if addiction is about your cage? What if addiction is an adaptation to your environment? Look.
So, wow, that is quite
Okay.
interesting.
This is way cool. It's so cool. And you know what I love it when this happens, when a guy like Bruce Alexander looks at that experiment, okay? Something like Johann said, that we've just figured, you know, drugs are addictive. They're addictive. All drugs are addictive, or certain drugs are more addictive, right? But he looks at it, at the experiment, and says, hey, what if they're just bored, right? And I was like, man, I love it when that happens. Like, it just kind of blew everything up, right?
Yeah.
And to have, like Johann says, this human experiment with the Vietnam War going on at the same time, where they saw that. And when I first read that, I thought, whoa, that just kind of just takes that off the table. The fact that substances are addictive, you know, and I've always believed that. I believe it with my whole heart. It's never about the substances. They're just a symptom, you know. It's what's driving the addiction, right? And like, what was driving that for the rats? Well, that's all there was to do in there, you know. And then they had other little rats, and they could get lucky and play with balls and have fun and eat and have everything they needed, right? Then they don't need it so much. And then what does that tell you? Like he says, what if it's about their cage? You know, so you think about the people out there who are so desperately sick, those people that are staying in our shelter right now. What if it's about the cage? Right? And then what does it take to rise above that cage? It takes such a system overhaul, right? And a totally new way of looking at things and responding to it. And I think because of people like Bruce Alexander and Johann Hari and Gabor Mate, he's going to refer to pretty soon too, who's a good, a great doctor who's really challenging as many things as he can about addiction. Johann's going to say pretty soon that Gabor Mate, in his book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, one line that really hit home for me was when he said, if we wanted to build a system to keep people down and out and deep in their addiction, we couldn't design a better system than the one we have in place today. Yeah. Imagine, right? Wow. Yeah. He's a cool little guy, though.
It is. I heard about the rat experiment. I wasn't aware about the Vietnam, like the war, that example. Yeah. I also really liked the example with the hip replacement. You know, your grandma is not coming out as a junkie when she had a hip replacement.
True.
And
that's too, you know, goes back to where we've talked before about what are we using that substance for? You know, are we using it? Are we drinking because when I drink, that's how I talk to people? I can't talk to people unless I drink. I need that substance to numb me to my life. You know, he's going to talk some more about that too. But yeah, the hip replacement in the grandmas, that's a good example.
Yeah. Okay. Should we watch the next part?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's fun.
It is.
We should have popcorn.
Oh, yes. Okay. Popcorn. Where's the popcorn? Why didn't I think about that? Okay.
Looking at this, there was another professor called Peter Cohen in the Netherlands who said, maybe we shouldn't even call it addiction. Maybe we should call it bonding. Human beings have a natural and innate need to bond. And when we're happy and healthy, we'll bond and connect with each other. But if you can't do that because you're traumatized or isolated or beaten down by life, you will bond with something that will give you some sense of relief. Now, that might be gambling, that might be pornography, that might be cocaine, that might be cannabis, but you will bond and connect with something because that's our nature. That's what we want as human beings. And I think, at first I found this quite a difficult thing to get my head around, but one way that helped me to think about it is I can see, yeah, I've got over by my seat there a bottle of water, right? I'm looking at lots of you, and lots of you have bottles of water with you, right? Forget drugs, forget the drug war. Totally legally, all of those bottles of water could be bottles of vodka, right? We could all be getting drunk, I might after this. But we're not, right? Now, because you've been able to afford the approximately £1 gazillion that it costs to get into a TED Talk, I'm guessing you guys could afford to be drinking vodka for the next 6 months. You wouldn't end up homeless. You're not going to do that. And the reason you're not going to do that is not because anyone's stopping you. It's because you've got bonds and connections that you want to be present for. You've got work you love. You've got people you love. You've got healthy relationships. And a core part of...
Wow. I stop here again because that's what we wanted to do. And you know what? Just when I listen to that, that's actually like the first step of what we do at Safe Harbour. It's the bonding and the connection piece. And it's so interesting for me to see that this, it's nothing over complicated. It's just like a natural human thing. And that it is, sometimes we make this all up. We maybe think, okay, getting out of this addiction, there must be like a really complicated process behind it. But what he just says is it's actually not.
Well, and when I think about how ostracized many of the people that we're serving are by the the broader community, and then I see this other community that they are in with their friends and dealers who might all be sick and stuck in this cycle, right? But it's still a connection, right? And so when the mountain is so big to climb to get to the healthier ones, still that connection there and that brotherhood, if you will, or sisterhood is really tight. It's deeper than what we know, even though it's messed up and might not be really healthy. It's a really deep connection because they're living on the edge, they're living on the edge every day, hyper alert, and desperate for that connection, and they'll find it with each other and with that substance. Yeah, it's interesting. And then like you said about connection, right? That's why I knew out of any mission statement that we wrote that the word connection had to be in there, because on the front lines, very often that's it. That's sustained somebody for a little bit, and how important it is. He's telling you, we're humans. We need to bond to survive. That's what we got to do. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
this is fun.
Okay. Let's see what else he has to share.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. What?
Of addiction, I came to think, and I believe the evidence suggests, is about not being able to bear to be present in your life. Now,
okay, stop it.
Really significant implications.
Hey.
That sentence. That's how he's defining addiction. It's not being able to bear to be present in your life. Whoa, that's a pretty powerful sentence.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good, it's a good descriptive one for us that, may not understand it all that well, but not to be able to bear to be present in your life. What's your cage look like, right? Or what did it look like? Yeah. Okay, I won't do that to you again.
Well, that's okay. You know what? We can just do it this way. You scream stop anytime you...
Okay.
These implications are for the war on drugs, right? In Arizona, I went out with a group of women who were made to wear T-shirts saying I was a drug addict and go out on chain gangs and dig graves while members of the public could jeer at them. And when those women get out of prison, they're going to have criminal records that mean they'll never work in the legal economy again. Now, that's a very extreme example, obviously, in the case of the chain gang, but actually almost everywhere in the world, we treat addicts to some degree like that. We punish them, we shame them, we give them criminal records, we put barriers between them reconnecting. There was a doctor in Canada, Dr. Gabor Mate, an amazing man, who said to me, if you wanted to design a system that would make addiction worse, you would design that system. Now, there's a place that decided to do the exact opposite, and I went there to see how it worked. In the year 2000, Portugal had one of the worst drug problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing. And every year, they tried the American way more and more. They punished people and stigmatized them and shamed them more. And every year, the problem got worse. And one day, the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition got together and basically said, look, we can't go on with a country where we're having ever more people becoming heroin addicts. Let's set up a panel of scientists and doctors to figure out what would genuinely solve the problem. And they set up a panel led by an amazing man called Dr. Heuer to look at all this new evidence. And they came back and they said, decriminalize all drugs, from cannabis to crack. But, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we used to spend on cutting addicts off, on disconnecting them, and spend it instead on reconnecting them with the society. And that's not, essentially, that's not really what we think of. What they did wasn't really what we think of as drug treatment in the United States and Britain. So they do residential rehab, they do psychological therapy that does have some value. But the biggest thing they did was the complete opposite of what we do. A massive program of job creation for addicts and micro loans for addicts to set up small businesses. So say you used to be a mechanic. When you're ready, they go to a garage and they'll say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. The goal was to make sure that every addict in Portugal had something to get out of bed for in the morning. And when I went and met the addicts in Portugal, it was fascinating. What they said is, as they rediscovered purpose, they rediscovered bonds and relationships with the wider society. It'll be 15 years this year since that experiment began, and the results are in. Injecting drug use is down in Portugal, according to the British Journal of Criminology, by 50%, 50%. Overdose is massively down. HIV is massively down among addicts. Addiction in every study is significantly down. One of the ways you know it's worked so well is that almost nobody in Portugal wants to go back to the old system.
Okay. Oh boy. There we are with the systems trauma. You know, I've said so many times that it's not substances that kill people, it's shame. Yeah. You know, when he talked about how those women had to wear those shirts and then people jeer at them. It's like those, remember back in the old medieval days and people had to stick their head in the hole and their arms up and people threw rotten food at them? Yeah. Man, how far have we progressed? But this is what blows my mind about Portugal. Like, and this is where we're stuck here in Canada and mostly in our political systems, is listening. Not only did they get the scientists and all the people to help them figure this out, but they actually listened to them and started doing something different. So often, and I think the most maddening thing ever is to have your services dictated by politicians who have zero idea of what's really going on. And are only responding to the naysayers about helping this situation at all in any way, shape, or form, right? And so you hear about this fresh air blowing in Portugal and you're like Johann Hari said, how do I get to Portugal? Can I live there? You know, that's what everybody wants to do, is go live there where people are listening. And imagine blowing up a system like that and saying, hey, that didn't work. Like, when are we going to get to this point? Are we getting worse? 1,000% yes. 1,000% yes, it's getting worse. Is everything we're doing helping? Not nearly enough. You know, take all the money, like he said, that we use to, you know, as we criminalize this situation compared to putting it in a whole other way that increases those bonds with society. So years ago, we ran a housing program called Harbour House, and it was a housing first model. And that means that the people who were housed in that house did not have to become sober to live there. They could drink in their house, but only in their rooms. If they were using other substances, they had to go out. You know, they couldn't do that in the house, but they could come back high and still have a place to be. Okay. staff 24/7, crucial to survival of that program. But we had a guy in there, one of the first guys that we welcomed into that house. And he was this big guy that had been on the streets forever, working in the drug trade. And we just went up to him one day and said, "Do you want to get housed? You don't have to quit drinking. We can get you in a house today." And he decided, yeah, he wanted to do that, right? So he was probably about late 40s, early 50s then. And so we got housed in this nice house. It was this nice, clean house, and there were staff there and meals and blah, blah, right? And then all these wonderful things started to happen, okay? He didn't quit drinking, but he wasn't drinking as much because now that he was in a house and he could have a TV, he wanted to get a Nintendo. So he started to save his money, some of his beer money, to get a Nintendo, okay? Then some angel from heaven donated a dog, little white dog, to Harbour House.
Mm-hmm.
And he fell in love with that dog. So this great big guy and this little teeny white dog, okay, grew to be the best of friends. And he would go where he would be totally inactive. He'd go walk the dog because the dog had to get walked. Never mind, he really needs to get walked. The dog needs to get walked. So he'd walk every day, twice a day with that dog. And as he's walking around the neighborhood, he sees his neighbors outside. And one of his neighbors had his arm in a sling and was trying to rake up leaves. So Buddy went and said, "Hey, I'll help you," right? So they got the job done. Then in the wintertime, that neighbor comes and rings the door at the house, and all the staff thought, "Oh, somebody did something. What's going on? Why is there a neighbor here?" And the neighbor says, "Hey, I have a snowblower and I'm going to do your sidewalks. And thank you so much for shoveling the side or for helping me with my leaves," right?
Wow.
I know. So what happened there though for Buddy was the broader community valued him. They valued him. That seems like a really small statement, but for years and years and years, he never felt that, you know, his behaviors made it so he couldn't feel that. He didn't feel that, right? And when that guy died, that neighbor came to his funeral.
Aww.
And it was so cool, right? And so that is exactly what Johann's talking about what happens. People start connecting to the broader community, and then what happens? You know, all of those lights, those what we always call Harbour lights, start to shine on people who haven't felt the warmth of that light in many, 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 many years, right? And wonderful things happen, like little white dogs. And yeah, I thought, whoa, I am learning a lot by watching this happen, you know? And plus, Buddy got to reconnect with his adult daughters who he hadn't seen for a long time because he finally had a place he could invite them to that he was proud of.
Mm-hmm.
He got on the bus and went to Saskatoon to visit his mom. Like all of those things would have been unheard of for him a few years before, right? But it was that connection. He was ready for that connection. And yeah. And so those daughters could come to that funeral and listen to the stories about their dad in a whole other way than the stories that were told about him before, right? It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. It's this focusing on the light, like, and on the positive. Like if you look at an addict and say, well, like have all those negative thoughts, and this is exactly what they receive.
Yeah.
Maybe not visible, but energetically. And so it's really hard for them. Like, this is, if that is all you get, like, this is what you take in. But when you send like the positive vibes, and this is what also is blossoming in them.
Yeah.
Super.
It's cool.
Okay,
cool.
let's watch. What's next here? What is he talking about?
Kind of political implications. Actually, there's a layer of implications for all this research below that. we live in a culture where people feel really increasingly vulnerable to all sorts of addictions, whether it's to their smartphones or to shopping or to eating. You know, before these talks began, you guys know this, that we were told we weren't allowed to have our smartphones on. And I have to say, a lot of you looked an awful lot like addicts who were being told their dealer was going to be unavailable for the next couple of hours. And, you know, a lot of us feel like that. And it might sound weird to say, oh, you know, I've been talking about how disconnection is a major driver of addiction, but weird to say it's growing because you think, well, we're the most connected society there's ever been, surely. But I increasingly began to think that the connections we have, we think we have, are like a kind of parody of human connection. If you have a crisis in your life, you'll notice something. It won't be your Twitter followers who come to sit with you. It won't be your Facebook friends who help you turn it round. It'll be your flesh and blood friends who you have deep and nuanced and textured face-to-face relationships with. And I think there's a study I learned about from Bill McKibben, the environmental writer, I think tells us a lot about this. It looked at the number of close friends the average American believes they can call on in a crisis. That number has been declining steadily since the 1950s. The amount of floor space an individual has in their home has been steadily increasing. And I think that's like a metaphor for the choice we've made as a culture, right? We've traded floor space for friends, we've traded stuff for connections. And the result is that we are one of the loneliest societies there has ever been. And Bruce Alexander, the guy who did the Rat Park experiment, says, we talk all the time in addiction about individual recovery. And it's right to talk about that. But we need to talk much more about social recovery. Something's gone wrong with us, not just as individuals, but as a group. And we've created a society where for a lot of us, life looks a whole lot more like that isolated cage and a whole lot less like Rat Park.
Yeah, that's something, hey?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I'm guilty of this, okay? Totally guilty and totally. Because before I had a phone, like, and everybody had a phone, or before we knew who was on the other end,
Yeah,
we would just pick up, you
Mm-hmm.
know? People, get this. Back in the day, people had the audacity to just show up at your house without phoning first.
yeah, yeah. I still have a friend
that-
who does that.
Right? And that was okay.
Yeah,
That was how we operated. That's what we did. Oh, I'm walking by, I'm going to pop in and say hello, right? And now it's like an affront to us. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, you can't just show up here.
Yeah.
Right?
And you know what? I just read, was it yesterday? A post that said, because like we have less and less friends at our home. Of course, like COVID did his part. But our kids don't know anymore how to socialize when you have friends over. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh my God.
True. Like I think you can look at that in so many different ways. Like he said, it seems as though we've got way more connections, but we don't. We might have broader service, but you know, we're doing our connecting on Facebook. Like I always cringe when I see condolences on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, and I shouldn't. I mean, that's how people are sending out some love. You know, I send out love that way too, but something about that pokes me. And it's and I also know about grief, and grief compels solitude. So sometimes, you know, if you're in that grief thing, and you need a little love, you might need it just on Facebook and not have your friends pop in, because I know about that. But still, there's, you know, back in the day when somebody died, you'd put a black armband around your arm. And when you walked around the town with that black armband, or the city, people knew it, and they would think, we need to allow this one some grace, some extra grace, right? They are in mourning. We're going to be extra kind and extra understanding and all of that. And I thought, boy, where'd that go? I don't know. That's gotten way off topic, but I certainly know with my phone, like I don't go to the bathroom anymore without my phone.
Actually, they are now toilet paper holders with an extra
charger.
No, a charger, and also like a little what is it?
Holder.
A little holder for your phone. We just ordered one. Oh my
Okay, good.
goodness. Okay, let's watch the. We need more red parks. That's it.
We need more rat parts.
If I'm honest, this isn't why I went into it, right? I didn't go in to discover the political stuff, the social stuff. I wanted to know how to help the people I love. And when I came back from this long journey and I'd learned all this, I looked at the addicts in my life, and if you're really candid, it's hard loving an addict, and there's going to be lots of people who know in this room you're angry a lot of the time. And I think one of the reasons why this debate is so charged is because it runs through the heart of each of us, right? Everyone has a bit of them that looks at an addict and thinks, I wish someone would just stop you. And the kind of script we're told for how to deal with the addicts in our lives is typified by the reality show Intervention. If you guys haven't seen it, I think everything in our lives is typified by reality TV, but that's another TED talk. If you've never seen the show Intervention, it's a pretty simple premise. Get an addict, all the people in their life, gather them together and say, if you don't shape up, they confront them with what they're doing. And they say, if you don't shape up, we're going to cut you off, right? So what they do is they take the connection to the addict and they threaten it. They make it contingent on the addict behaving the way they want. And I began to see why that approach doesn't work. And I began to think that almost that's like the importing of the logic of the drug war into our private lives. So I was thinking, well, how can I be Portuguese, right? And what I try to do now, and I can't tell you I do it consistently, and I can't tell you it's easy, is to say to the addicts in my life that I want to deepen the connection with them, to say to them, I love you, whether you're using or you're not. I love you, whatever state you're in. And if you need me, I'll come and sit with you because I love you and I don't want you to be alone or to feel alone. And I think the core of that message, you're not alone, we love you, has to be at every level of how we respond to addicts, socially, politically, and individually. For 100 years now, we've been singing war songs about addicts. I think all along we should have been singing love songs to them, because the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Thank you.
Did you get goosebumps?
Yes, I did.
I know.
Yes.
I always get goosebumps, and I've watched it 10 times, 20 times.
Wow.
Yeah. But
that was a great TED talk.
I know, I love that one. For people out there who might have listened to him say that about loving, or how hard it is to love someone, like, that's so true. And it's so hard. It's so hard. There's so many rotten behaviors that are associated with it, with different drugs, and they're so lost though, and it's really, really hard. But still, I think it has to be the answer, what he's saying, and you notice he said, I love you. I'm right here. I'll come and sit with you. He didn't say, I will come and give you all my money, or I will come and pick you up so you can live in my house again. And, so we're all living in this chaos. He didn't say that. He said, I will come and sit with you because I love you, whether you're using or not. And I'm right here. I don't want you to be alone. Is that enough? Yeah, I think if you're in that spot, it is enough. Wow. It was a good
yes
talk.
Yes, I'm thinking again.
Yeah. So for everybody, just a reminder, that's Johann Hari, and the book is Chasing the Scream, if you want a good read. It's a great resource. Okay, and I'm really glad we decided to do that. I was kind of wondering how it would work, but I think there's some really great, like, it would be good to do something with Gabor Mate's TED Talks too, or some of the stuff that he's doing. Because I think people really appreciate it. They want to hear this stuff. Yeah. And it would be good to be a conduit for that.
I just had another idea I have to tell you after. So thank you everyone for listening today. I think this was a great TED Talk. I think you should have a TED Talk at one point. Maybe we have to put that.
Know how to do it.
Well, we will figure it out.
Yeah.
Captain for TED Talk. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Yeah, if you want to listen to the whole thing again, like I will put the link in the comments. And don't forget to follow us on YouTube. And also we have our Christmas bag, gift bag.
Oh yeah.
For that, right? No, not rough.
Yep. We're filling some bags for the people so they have something on Christmas morning to open. The community always comes through and helps us out at Christmas time, and we're always grateful for it. We put some suggestions out there on some of the things they could buy, but monetary donation is helpful too, because we already know what we have excess of and some of the things that we don't have. And so, yeah, anything, of course, is always appreciated and will be very appreciated on Christmas morning. I know it.
Exactly. Okay, awesome. Thank you, everyone. So if you want to donate, the link is also in the comments, and I will leave the last things up to you, Kath. With
Steady as she goes,
Steady as
as
she goes.
always.
Thank you. Bye, guys.